When you make a cake and don't use a recipe, it can often end up like this. But when you use a recipe, it can often end up like this.
Oh, that looks so delicious. I think I'm going to cry.
And when you educate, you need a recipe or a method. Educational experts in the past, like Charlotte Mason and Maria Montessori, agreed on this. They said you need a homeschool method to have direction. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this video. And so we're going to go through the 7 most popular homeschool methods in speedy style. Let's get started. Firstly, there is the traditional method. So this is the method they use in schools these days. The idea is to have a curriculum, sit the children down at desks so they can do the curriculum, which is often bookwork. And then you'll have a teacher who is up the front who is teaching the children the material, kind of spoon feeding the information as they go along. This isn't a bad method, and a lot of new homeschooling parents use it because it is familiar. And I think that's a really good idea because there is so much changing in your life when you start homeschooling. Starting homeschooling with a familiar method like the traditional educational approach can be a good idea. But an approach that I think is even better is the Charlotte Mason method. Charlotte Mason was a classical educator, what we're going to talk about next, but she thought the classical method was perhaps a little bit too rigorous, and so she said, let's do something that is a little bit more flexible. She incorporated a lot of outdoor elements. She was actually the creator of Girl Guides and Scouts. And she threw in a lot of habit training for the children. She had a saying which is parroted a lot these days. She said, education is a life, a discipline, and an atmosphere. I think, is that right? Education is life, yeah, something like that anyway. She meant education couldn't just be bookwork, but it was part of forming good habits, having an atmosphere of good parents around, and just part of life. She wrote an educational series called the Home Education Series, and that is available online for free. I'll put a link below. All right, and then there is the classical method. So the classical method was used 150 plus years ago, all the way back to Aristotle and Plato. It taught children in 3 stages: the grammar stage, which was your early years, the logic or dialectic stage, which was in middle years, and then the rhetoric stage, which was your high school years. And the aim was to teach children according to their developmental stage. When children were young and they loved things like poems and memorization, the idea was to give them lots of information in that grammar stage. And then when children entered into the phase where they were a bit more argumentative, she used to call this the pert stage, then the idea was to teach them logic and debating and argumentative essays, those sorts of things. And then when they got to what she called the poetic age, which is the teenage years, the idea was then to teach them about how to present themselves graciously and to make a point winningly, because children are at a stage when they're teenagers when all of a sudden they want to look cool and they want everybody to think, wow, I'm someone, and the idea is to give them what they need for those stages. All right, and then there's the eclectic method. So if you're sitting there going, oh, I really like the classical method, debating, I love that, but I love the nature stuff in Charlotte Mason, really appeals to me. But you know, sometimes I feel a little bit like my kid probably needs a test so I understand where he's up to. Oh, I don't know what to choose. Then you should choose the eclectic method, because this means you can choose what you want out of these great homeschooling methods. And they've made things like My Father's World and Tapestry of Grace, which are 2 eclectic curriculum which cater for parents who are just like you. So the eclectic method is all about picking and choosing the bits of those curriculum that you love. All right, and then there is the unit studies method. This method is hands-on. And the other thing about this method is it will often, a curriculum that uses the unit studies method will often teach children who are in the family, who are of different ages in the family. You could have a 9-year-old, you could have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the curriculum will cater for all of them. And the idea is that the parent does the main curriculum with all of them, and then they'll go off and do age-appropriate assignments depending on where they are up to mentally. It's very hands-on, so it's great for boys who can't sit still and don't want to do a more traditional curriculum or a classical style curriculum. By the way, Charlotte Mason is also really good if you have a child who can't sit still and wants to be outside all the time. By the way, if you're thinking, I'd love to know more about these homeschooling methods, I teach that in my homeschool course, which I've linked below. And then there's the Montessori approach. So this is great. I love how there's so many homeschool modifications you can do around your house and your garden. The idea is to create a friendly educational space for children so they can grab things off the shelf and have a child-based, interest-based education. Whereas a lot of the other homeschool methods we've been through have been teacher-led educational approaches. This one is more giving the children the tools where they can learn things themselves and then letting the children choose. And the idea is that if you have interest-based learning, the children will learn more if they're curious. And that's a good thing, right? Unschooling is another method that is very much so child-based education. John Holt, who is the father of the modern-day unschooling approach, said that parents should give their children as much freedom as they can possibly bear. And there's a lot to be said for this because again, if children are curious, they'll learn a whole lot more. But then there's also the point of how will the children learn maths? Well, unschooling proponents say they will learn it if they want to and they won't learn it if they don't want to. But what I have found happens, because I've been very interested in the whole unschooling thing, is that when the child eventually goes, oh, I want to go and do that university course, they teach themselves. And the idea with this method is to create children who have curious minds, who go and learn the information themselves when they want to. It's kind of the polar opposite to traditional education where you're spoon feeding the child information. The other thing to consider is that unschooling has a lot of different definitions. Some people see it as the child doing whatever they like and the parents not having much input, but a lot of other people see it more as the parent giving the child very strong suggestions that they learn certain things and not learn other things. So in this way, an unschooler's educational choices is made in the context of the family. And I have a friend who is an unschooling parent and she does a fantastic job. Her name is Abby and I'll link her channel in the description box below if unschooling is a method that interests you. If you're thinking it's hard to decide what I want, you can go to my homepage at howdoihomeschool.com and click on the free homeschool style quiz and that will be downloaded to your inbox. And that way you can quickly do a quiz and figure out where you sit in terms of what homeschool style you're going to like next. Now, homeschool methods are really important, but there are a few things you must do before you even start looking at the homeschooling methods. And you can find out how to do that in my video here. After all, homeschool methods are complicated, just like life. Like I'm sitting on my child's potty at the moment.